Hi guys, it's Miss Simon. So I wanted to make you this Edpuzzle video today for science. So remember yesterday, guys, we started talking about the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is everything that includes air. Okay, so the gases that surround all of us. Okay, anything that has to do with air. And we also learned yesterday, if we think about it, remember the atmosphere is made of two main gases. And who can remember what are those two main gases? What are the two main gases that make up the atmosphere? If you said nitrogen and oxygen, you are correct. Remember we talked about yesterday how can we can remember that kind of with our hand. 4 of our fingers represent the amount of nitrogen in the atmosphere, and our fifth finger, our thumb, represents that part of oxygen. Okay, so remember there is 78% nitrogen and only 23% oxygen, so it's mostly made of nitrogen. Also, our atmosphere, we learned yesterday, has 5 different layers. The closest one to Earth, the one that we fly planes as, remember, is called the troposphere. And the exosphere is that one that is the farthest away in space. So today, guys, we're going to talk about with the atmosphere itself, what is the study of the atmosphere? What do we call that? And what specifically do people study when they're talking about the atmosphere? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And remember, if I highlight it, you need to write it down in your notes. All right, so if we think of, you guys have heard of these people before, meteorologist. Okay, so go ahead and put this down in our notes. The science job that is known as a meteorologist is actually the study of Earth's atmosphere. Okay, so the study of Earth's atmosphere is called meteorology. Go ahead and put that down. And you're likely to see a meteorologist on the nightly news. I'm sure many of you guys have seen the weather before, or your parents have watched the news, and you can see that there's a weather lady or their weatherman that kind of explains what's going on with the weather, whether it's going to snow, what the temperature is going to be, what the winds happening with the wind. Okay, that's called a meteorologist, and their job is to actually study the Earth's atmosphere. So make sure we have that in our notes. The study of Earth's atmosphere is called meteorology. Now, meteorologists compare temperature readings, wind pressure in the atmosphere, precipitation, so if it's going to rain or snow, and other variables to predict the weather. Okay, they don't just go on TV and say, I think it's going to snow today. Okay, they have to look at a bunch of different things to see and predict whether it's going to snow or not. If you look at this picture, we can kind of see, you guys I'm sure have seen this on the news before. Okay, it talks about wind pressure, it talks about cold fronts and warm fronts. So meteorologists look at all these things in order to tell us what the weather is going to be like. So I'm sure that's something new for all of you guys. I'm sure you didn't know that the person, the weather person on TV, the meteorologist, is actually studying the atmosphere. All right, moving on. So what determines these weather patterns that meteorologists study? Well, that is the wind and the clouds. And we're going to talk about 3 particular things that happens with the winds and clouds, okay? So go ahead and add this into your notes. So wind and clouds. So wind and clouds in the atmosphere interact with a landform to determine weather patterns, okay? So something happens with the wind and the clouds and they end up interacting with some sort of landform, whether it's a mountain, whether it's a ledge, whether it's a rock, okay? They interact with some type of landform and that determines the weather. That combination of the wind and the clouds in the atmosphere interacting with that landform, and that's what causes different weather patterns. So go ahead and put that into your notes. All right, the first weather pattern that we're going to talk about is something called lifting. So lifting is basically when mountains push air upwards, okay, and they push the air so high upwards that eventually the clouds can't hold anymore water or snow, so they precipitate. So it rains or it snows. Okay. So lifting is when mountains push air upwards to the point where the clouds can't hold anymore, so it rains or it snows, depending on how cold it is. So go ahead and put that in your notes, please. Lifting occurs when mountains push the air upwards. Taller mountains push the air high enough to where the air reaches its saturation point and then precipitates. Okay, so again, lifting is when air, okay, is being pushed upwards. Okay, mountains are pushing the air upwards, and the air gets pushed so high that the cloud gets full and it has to rain. All right, our next type of weather pattern that we're going to talk about is something called the rain shadow effect. Okay, so the rain shadow effect happens when, as clouds are pushed upward, the moisture condenses and it's released as precipitation. Okay, and that precipitation is only happening on one side of the mountain. So the clouds get so full that it can't even get to the other side of the mountain before it rains. So this rain shadow effect is where you see one side of a mountain that's green and it's growing grass, and then the other side of the mountain is just pretty much dead. It has no life on it because it never rains on that side of the mountain. So the rain shadow effect, as clouds are pushed upwards, the moisture condenses and it's released as precipitation. The clouds release all their precipitation, creating a rain shadow on the opposite slope. So one slope is really green and grows a lot of grass, and the other side of the mountain is pretty much dead. There's no grass, no real life on that other side. All right, and the last type we're going to talk about, the last type of weather pattern is something we call a wind funnel. Okay, a wind funnel is when mountains, just as mountains can force wind and clouds upward, they also can funnel the wind. So wind with mountains can go upwards, but it can also go through the mountain and create kind of like a funnel. Okay, wind that encounters a blockage moves through the path of least resistance. Wind funnels often see high speeds. Okay, so if you look at this picture here, guys, we see kind of a mountain on this side and a mountain on this side. So that wind is being pushed through that mountain because the mountains are so high. Okay, it's easier for the wind to just go straight through instead of having to go all the way up and over the mountain. So it creates a wind funnel where the wind just funnels through, and you get wind that is very, very fast. Okay, I like to also think of this as like in the city of Chicago. We call it the Windy City. Well, why is it the Windy City? Because those buildings are so tall that instead of the wind going up the side of the building and down the other side of the building, the wind takes the path of least resistance and just goes straight through the buildings. That's why if you've ever stood in between buildings in downtown Chicago, it's been so windy. That's because of something we call the wind funnel effect. So go ahead and push this down in your notes. Wind funnel. Just as mountains can force wind and clouds upwards, they also funnel the wind. Wind that encounters a blockage moves through the path of least resistance. Wind funnels often see high speed winds. And you guys can go ahead and draw this picture in your notes to help you. Okay, remember you got a mountain on one side, mountain on one side. Instead of that wind going over, it's just going to go straight through those two mountains. All right, let's go ahead and answer these questions. Landforms can impact the weather and climate. So when I'm talking about landforms, I'm talking about mountains and other pieces of land. Can mountains and other things impact the weather and climate? True or false? If you said true, you're absolutely correct. We just talked about that. Mountains have a large impact on the weather and the climate. Location 4 on the map is an example of which of the following. Okay, so location 4 is this dead area. Okay, which of those did we talk about where it rains on one side of the mountain and the other side of the mountain is dead? Is that lifting, landform breeze, rain shadow effect, or wind funnel? If you said rain shadow effect, you are correct. Remember, on one side of the mountain, it's green, it's lively. On the other side of the mountain, it doesn't get any rain, so everything is actually dead. All right, guys, so that is where we are going to stop for today. Okay, so remember, people who study the atmosphere are actually called meteorologists, and landforms like mountains have a very large impact on the weather and climate. The three specific types of weather formations that we talked about is that of lifting. Remember, when the wind is pushed upwards and the clouds get so full that it has to rain. We see the rain shadow effect, where if we have the side of a mountain, one side is so green and alive because it gets lots of rain, and rain never is able to reach the other side, so the other side is dead. And finally, we have a wind funnel, which remember the wind takes that path of least resistance and goes through those mountains because it's quicker instead of going over them. All right, guys. So I hope that this video was helpful, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.